What's up, my comic comrades? Since Mr. Sinister has made his return in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run, this is the perfect time to break down his origin. That way you can get to know the character a little better and how he's going to be important going forward. But also, he was one of my favorite X-Men villains as a kid. He was dope in the 90s animated series. I even had his action figure, him and Magneto. I actually might have it in a box somewhere buried deep in a closet. But I digress. Let's talk about how he came to be, and trust me, it's a pretty great origin. I do want to add that nothing in this episode is going to include any additions by Jonathan Hickman for Mr. Sinister. With that said, Mr. Sinister first fully appeared in Uncanny X-Men 221 in September of 1987, but we are given his origin in the 4-part miniseries titled The Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix. At the beginning of this series, we see Nathan Essex, the man who would become Mr. Sinister, was born in Victoria, England during the 19th century. He was regarded by some to be the greatest scientific mind of his generation, but by others, a dangerous man twisted by obsession. But despite which side you agree with, he was extremely passionate about his work and also loved his wife Rebecca very much, as well as their son. Unfortunately though, his son died at the age of 4 due to birth defects. Now I should also mention that Essex was obsessed with Darwin's theory and would always read his book, Origin of the Species. So when his son died, to help deal with the loss of his son, he threw himself into his work in theories about evolution, which in turn caused him to neglect his wife, who was pregnant with their second child. But this is where things get really crazy, because he threw himself into his work to help deal with the pain of his son dying, but his son's death also made him go full crazy. First example, he stole his 4-year-old son's dead body in hopes of figuring out what had caused his death. And just wait until his wife finds out about this, because she does. In any case, his research eventually led to a theory that humanity was slowly evolving with various mutations, and that humans contain parcels of hereditary information which he calls the Essex factors. So soon he gives a presentation about his theories at a meeting of the Royal Society in London. And he tells everyone listening these parcels within 100 years or so will mutate. Gentlemen, we are on the verge of an evolutionary breakthrough. As he's saying all of this, he rips off a sheet revealing a Frankenstein-type monster that's made up of human parts fused with anatomical regions of animals and other inorganic materials. He then explains, this is but a crude prototype I have assembled to illustrate some possible biological extrapolations. That's right, he stitched together human and animal parts as an example of what we might evolve into. Sounds legit. Now obviously this doesn't go over well with the crowd, and they call him an abomination and a madman. Essex is just like, you cowards. Surely science must be above such petty conventional modes of decency. This is the future. Imagine the improvements on our present human form that are possible. With one man in particular being like, look, I've lost a son too. I know how it could affect the mind. But if you let yourself go too far, you'll become a monster like the creature you've made. But Essex is like, let me be a monster then, and goes to a bar. At the bar, he's greeted by a man who's like, I got some creatures beyond your imagination you might want to see. When the man brings Essex to the creatures, he's horrified. They're behind bars, and he gets close to one of them, and they try to attack him. The stranger and his men who brought him there then attack and rob him. He also finds out they're called the Marauders, but in the end, he convinces them to work for him and join his cause of science. They accept and start delivering him parts for his experiments, as well as mutated subjects for his experiments. A little bit after this, Essex's wife, Rebecca, started getting suspicious of what he was always working on and who he was working with, and she eventually stumbled upon their 4-year-old son's body floating in some kind of chamber. This obviously disgusted her and terrified her. She tells Essex, how could you do such a thing? And he basically says, I couldn't let our son's death be in vain. I studied him to prevent others from dying like him. It's around this time Apocalypse in disguise introduces himself to Essex, as he found out about him when the Marauders tried to capture Apocalypse and bring him to Essex. But obviously, that didn't go over too well for the Marauders. Apocalypse then tells Essex he saw potential in all of his work, and asked Essex if he would help him rise to power, and in return he would give Essex power beyond all belief. Inconceivable power! Rebecca was there during the conversation and was disgusted and not happy about any of this. But it didn't matter, because initially Essex was like, you're crazy, bro, but then when Apocalypse showed his true form, he was like, I got it. I get it now. But also, you're living proof of my theory and the mutated master race. Also, around this time, Cyclops and Jean Grey arrive from the future to stop Apocalypse's plans and also stop Essex from becoming Mr. Sinister, saying it's not too late for you to stay a good man. But obviously, that didn't work out. After this, Essex returned home where his wife was in premature labor with their second child. And tragedy struck again when his child was delivered stillborn. But to make things worse, the doctors told Essex, your wife is not going to survive this premature labor. It's here that Essex realizes everything he's been doing has been wrong, and that he's neglected his wife, and even says, I realize now that you mean more to me than my work. more to me than science. I've returned to you, sweet Rebecca. We shall live again. We shall laugh again. You must hold on. I could save you using all my genius. But Rebecca is like, my husband, you ask for my forgiveness, but this I cannot give you. She continues to say, after our son Adam died, you just became twisted and cruel. And her final words to him are, you are utterly and contemptibly sinister. That's right, the last words she ever said to him was sinister, which clearly left a lasting impression on him. After his wife's death, Essex goes full-blown crazy town and starts breaking everything in his house and anything he can find, as well as contemplating killing himself. Driven mad by the death of both of his children and now his wife, Essex finds Apocalypse and accepts his offer from earlier. So Apocalypse hooks him up to some devices and gives him mutations that grant him longer life, advanced strength, and a healing factor. And as a result of the mutation, Essex no longer felt mortality or remorse. Once the mutation was complete, Apocalypse told Essex to take another name. So he took the name Sinister, which of course was the last word of his dying wife. And that, my friends, is Mr. Sinister's origin. It's a pretty dope villain origin story if I do say so myself, and super complex, especially if you read his origin within the Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix miniseries. You get all the little nuances and details, and it's fantastic. Like the addition that Mr. Sinister also created Cyclops' son, Cable. Yeah, that also happens. As for powers and abilities, I'm gonna run through them briefly. As you know, Mr. Sinister is a genetically altered human. Because of this, he has superhuman physical and mental abilities. He's also telepathic and able to manipulate the minds of others in a bunch of different ways. He's capable of energy projection through telekinesis, and of course, he's a scientific genius that's an expert in fields of genetics, engineering, physics, biology, and cloning, like when he cloned Jean Grey, aka Madeline Pryor. And last, but certainly not least, he's a great planner and manipulator. All solid traits of a bad guy. As for reading recommendations, check out Uncanny X-Men 221, Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix miniseries, Age of Apocalypse, Messiah Complex, and Uncanny X-Men by Kieran Gillen. But other than that, let us know what you think of Mr. Sinister and his origin in the comment section down below. First up, for the week of September 18th, we have Spider-Man issue 1. This is a brand new Spider-Man title written by director J.J. Abrams and his son, Henry Abrams. In it, we see a mysterious new villain come after Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. Next, we have Absolute Carnage issue 3. If you're a fan of the symbiotes like Venom, Carnage, Scream, and so on, you need to be reading this title. Donny Cates is doing some awesome stuff. Here we have House of X issue 5. Can Xavier and his students fight to survive against the humans' plan to eliminate them? Well, we're gonna find out, because there's only one issue left after this. Now we have Batman issue 79. Tom King's Batman run is quickly coming to an end, so if you want to see how he finishes off his run, definitely jump on now. And finally, we have Flash Forward issue 1. If you wanted to know what happened to Wally West after the events of Heroes in Crisis, this is the comic you need to read, as it's going to pick up after the events of Heroes in Crisis. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Variant, my friends, but if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out this one right here, and if you like the channel and all the videos we're putting out, be sure to subscribe. But I'll see you guys next time when I talk about all things comics.